Hi, I'm going to talk to you about a couple of personalities from ancient times. Both of these personalities or gentlemen had a great deal to do with libraries in their particular time in history. And I thought I'd just pass along some information on them. You may know about them, you may not, but I find both of them to have led some pretty fascinating lives as librarians, as part of their very varied life. The first person is Hyginus. He was brought to Rome by the emperor, the first emperor of Rome, Augustus, and no one is really sure of what year he was born in, but he fits into Suetonius, who is the biographer of Emperor Augustus, and he places the first notations of Hyginus showing up in the households as 55 BC. He was placed into the household of Octavian, and Octavian was the future precept of Rome, and he received a lot of education there. I mean, tremendous amounts of education. He was taught by one of the best Greek scholars of that particular time in history. His name was Alexandros Polyhistor. And he eventually, as he grows up, he becomes the librarian for Octavian's collection. Octavian had one of the largest library collections in Rome, private collections in Rome at that time. Octavian also became the teacher of Ovid, who was the great poet. The first Roman Empire, Augustus, had a dream. I mean, as all great men do, he wanted to leave a legacy. And his big thing was that he wanted to build this magnificent tribute to the god Apollo. And it was going to be a temple, and of course it became the Temple of Apollo. Placed it on the Palatine Hill so that all Roman citizens could see it. All Roman people, actually, had to include all the slaves. And that it would assume mythical proportions when you looked at it. One of the reasons I am so fascinated with the Temple of Apollo is that one of the big drives that Augustus had was to include a library in the plans. And not only was it a temple, it was also a library. And of course that library was going to hold a lot of religious text, but Rome at this time, and so much of the Greek influence, with so many scholars, Rome being the oratory capital of the world, all of this exchange of ideas going on, bottom line was that it became also a place to house, literary works and opinions. So Hyginus becomes the named librarian of the Temple of Apollo. And one of the things that I find interesting about this particular person was that on Inauguration Day, he was thought of in such a respected manner that he was freed. The emperor freed him. So as a freed man, he took his position with the library, and he was there basically till the end of his life. He took a different name when he was freed. His name became Gaius Julius, and he no longer was Hyginus, except that became his last name and not his only name. So he was one of the more interesting people in library history, and so was the Emperor Augustus. The next person I want to talk about is Callimachus, and I find Callimachus really interesting because he's one of the biggest elitist snobs of this particular place in history. He lived from basically 310 to 240 BC. He was a native of the Greek colony Cyrene, which is in Libya. He was a poet, a literary critic, and a scholar, and basically most renowned and known for being at the library in Alexandria. had the patronage of the Ptolemies, which was a big deal. It gave him position and respect and power that had he not had their patronage, he probably would not have gotten as far as he did. Very, very smart man, though, extremely smart. He was educated in Athens, and he traveled all over the known world at that time, and he went to North Africa for a brief period of his life, and when he came back, he moved to Alexandria. He married well, and he was a global thinker. He thought he could take large concepts and really think about them. The Library of Alexandria is, in that period of history, was, like the consummate library. I mean, it still is studied, and it's still postulated what happened to it, and what happened, when warring hordes would come, and how did it get destroyed, and what did it house, and what did its collection look like, and all of those things. And it's not surprising that Callimachus really wanted to be the chief librarian at the Library of Alexandria. Sadly, that was not to be. But going back a little ways, he did make his mark in history, because one of the things that he did, he organized this collection, which reportedly was to be over or close to 1 million scrolls. He became the first bibliographer, or the first library catalog creator, as it were. He developed these lists, or these panakis, and he had 120 volumes of all these lists, but it was a chronologically detailed library catalog. And so it just, revolutionized the library at Alexandria. Now, sadly, he was also a poet and a critic. And he had, as a scholar, he was a Hellenistic scholar at the library in Alexandria, and he leaned towards the shorter poem format. Now, it doesn't seem like it would be a big deal, but think about what media was then. Think about how people got information and how they read things. Poetry was a big deal. One of his students, who also was at the library, his name was Apollonius Rhodius. He got into a extremely horrific argument with Apollonius. Apollonius was a person of his own reputation as a scholar. He was really a proponent of the epic form of poetry, much like the Homer epic. And this went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Well, sadly, Ptolemy II was also extremely on the side of the epic. He liked everything. Ptolemy was a very well-read man. But this whole little bickering and barbing each other and all that was reported to be, by a lot of the classic scholars, including Peter Green, who is a very renowned scholar in this particular period and place in history. He thought that this was kind of like, Callimachus' Achilles' heel, and this is what prevented him from becoming the chief librarian. He never got over it. This bickering lasted 30 years, and he never ever got to be the chief librarian at the Library of Alexandria. Another little interesting fact is that Callimachus, for that period of history, was the leading authority on dogs. He wrote volumes about dogs, and he was the leading expert on the breed that later became known as the Maltese. But he wrote volumes on the Maltese dog, and that was another one of his contributions to history. I'm going to stop now so that I can get this posted to YouTube quickly and keep it under 10 minutes. Please come back for part 3. Thanks.